In the previous lesson, we covered scale degrees in the context of a scale. In this lesson, we're gonna cover how to think of them in the context of the triad. So right here we have a C major triad. We covered that this was the root, and then we have the third, and then finally the fifth. So we have 1, we skip 2, go to 3, and then 5. So this is the basic formula for a major triad. And we can take it to another starting point, let's say F, because it's also going to be major, and it's still going to be 1, 3, 5. Technically, we're not using the first notes of that scale, but then again, we are zooming in to the context of F. So in the context of an F major chord, even though we are in the C major scale, still we have 1, because it is the starting point, and then we skip 2, we go to 3, we skip 4, and then we go to 5. The great thing about scale degrees, like I mentioned, is that they tell us the role of a note in the scale. So this is a C major, right? If I was to make it a C minor, what would happen is this 3 would go down by a semitone. We flat it or we make it minor. So we have this chord now. It sounds pretty dark. Now, a C minor chord, because we are talking about a triad, is still gonna be some kind of 1, 3, 5, but with a slight modification. So let's delete the 3 because it's changed. So we have 1, we still skip 2, and originally we had 3. But since the 3 was taken down by a semitone, it was flattened. Now it becomes a flat 3. So now a C minor chord is still 1, 3, 5, but because we changed one note and made it flat or made it minor, now we have a flat 3. Let me just move it to become a D minor because D minor is in the scale. So now we have D minor right there and it fits perfectly. So we still have minor chords even in the major scale. So when we look at the scale degrees of this D minor chord, we have 1 and then 2 and then flat 3. The reason why we call it a flat 3 even though this is in the scale is because normally we compare it to a major version of itself. So this would have been D major. And this would have been the legit 3, not a flat 3. But now since we are following the C major scale, we're going to drop it down by a semitone. So now it is a flat 3. And again, I'm not telling you that you cannot go out of the key or explore outside. Actually, I love doing that. And we're going to cover that when the time comes. But for now, this is the basics of it. Now, this is where I have a little problem with DAWs. Because when I take the C major and turn it into a C minor, so I flat the 3, right? It turns the E into a D sharp. Now, there's no problem calling it E sharp. It's not that deep. But in the long term, it's really advisable to know how to spell chords. It will make it so much easier to understand chord progressions and how notes relate to each other. So, in the C major triad, we had C as the root, and then E as the third, and then G as the fifth. C, E, G. Since we took the third and dropped it down by semitone, it still plays the role of the third. For it to make our life easier, instead of calling it D sharp, we're gonna keep it as an E, but this time call it an E flat. Does that make sense? So now we still have C, E, G, but the same way we had 1, 3, 5, the 3 became flat. So this E becomes an E flat as well. And it's gonna be a common pattern across different chords. For example, if we were to turn it into wait, what chord is that again? A C diminished. We take the fifth and drop it down by semitone, meaning we flat it. So now we have this chord. At first glance, you could call it C, D sharp, and F sharp. But since we are looking at it under the perspective or the context or the system of a C chord, we're still gonna call it C, E, G, but we're gonna have C, E flat, and then G flat. And technically this would be a flat 5. Let me just write a flat next to it. Flat 5. So now this is a C diminished. We're going to cover triads a little bit more in depth. This is not a lesson on triads. This is a lesson on scale degrees, but in the context of triad. But again, like I mentioned in the previous lessons, priority should be the music itself. So don't get too caught up in D sharp versus E flat. If you have an idea that has that note, just play the note. Get the idea out first and then analyze later so that you don't break the flow of that creativity that you have.